There it goes. I love this piece of technology. I'm just like a little kid. All right, so how many, I recognize a lot of faces from this morning, so let's do it the other way. How many were not in my morning session? Okay, so we're almost 50-50. So this morning I presented the presentation that this slide came from and talked a lot about implementing change management in a two-phased approach. And I distilled a whole lot of learning, both the easy way and the not so easy way, about being successful at change management into kind of this is my approach to implementing change management. And it's something that I didn't really introduce myself this morning. So I am Greg Sanker, and I blog about service management as something that I do to share with the community. I'm part of the global service management community. Most of the people that you read books on service management or the ITIL authors are people that I pal around with on Facebook. So I'm kind of connected to that community, and yet my heart is with people who are actually doing this for a living or in their actual day-to-day working. And so I find myself being this bridge of understanding the academic beauty of a well-oiled process, and yet, what was the saying? The best laid plans don't survive contact with the enemy. And so we live, okay, it's not that our business is the enemy, but it's like we live in that real world. And I found an awful lot of people that do what I do come here and tell you about the wonderful processes, and you walk out going, well, that was brilliant, but it does nothing for me at where I live. And so that's my writing and my blogging and the speaking that I do is about, let's do this in the real world. And to that end, I like to be, I don't know if I want to say I like to be interrupted, but I like to be interactive. Because if I say something that you find challenging or are way out of sync, then we both have the opportunity to learn from that experience. Because my role is to help you guys be successful at it, you and a lot of others be successful at actually implementing change management. So this morning's session was really kind of this is a approach to implementing change management, or if you have a very, very basic change management program, which I've labeled phase 1, has no bearing on any other standards process. That's just me saying this is what a lot of organizations do as their very first entry into change management. And then talk about maturing that into a second phase of change management, which is essentially what you'll see in the best practices, ITIL and ISO 20000 and some of the other frameworks, is a fairly mature process. And we talked briefly this morning about if you try to implement a fully mature process, you're biting off a whole lot that you may not be able to organizationally chew. But if you start off with a very, very basic program, you leave yourself some challenges that you might not be able to overcome down the road. Not the least of which is people's perception of what change management really should be is very, very basic and very internally focused. So this is a workshop that I did when I presented this material in Norway, and they did what they called a service bazaar, where and I'm cheating by their rules because this is us and I get to set the rules here, but the rules were no PowerPoints, no preparation. Basically, come and lead a workshop where the people that come attend talk to you about what are the challenges they see within this topic, and then let's kind of workshop through it. Now, naturally, I've got lots of notes on my tablet that I kind of want to work around, but I want this to be interactive because my goal is that it is just not a one-way communication, but there's active engagement with you guys as well. There is, depending on how you guys respond to my suggestion, I've originally done this, or generally do this as a workshop where I give you assignments, so we have a group here and a group here, you kind of work on your assignment and then we kind of talk about it, because then we kind of get our hands on the material. So if you're really, really opposed to that, either politely walk out or say, I don't really want to do that. But from this morning's session, it occurred to me that one of the things that I never actually talked about was, what is the process? I mean, I talk a lot about the processes and the important piece, but we do have to do a process. I mean, there has to be a process for change management. So what I thought I would do is just show in a little bit more detail and kind of walk our way through that of what is the general process. So I'm going to go through this pretty quick. So up here in the upper left, it all starts with customer. So the business identifies some need that they have, and you already disagree with me because you say, well, some changes just need to be done. That's absolutely right. But if we're perceiving what we do correctly is we don't just implement changes because technology needs to be kept fresh or we need to manage capacity, but we do those things to maintain something that the customer really does care about. In other words, we keep our applications patched and up to date to maintain certain levels of security and stability and availability and capacity and those kind of things. So it does start with what is it that we're doing for the customer. They have a business need. If you can't identify what the business need is, Brian and I were chatting about this just briefly, if you can't identify what the business need is, then you might already be astray with what is it that we're doing, why are we doing this? So you really want to start with what is the business need. Just keep that in mind. So we create a request for change. So basically, we have a change. Let's document what the change is. And RFC is the generally accepted term. Change proposals, change. There's lots of terms that they go by. The terms aren't really that important, but if you don't already use a name, use a request for change because that's the standard. And it defines the who, what, why, where, how, implementation plan, rollback plan, and all that sort of stuff. And if we have time, I thought maybe we'd pull that up and take a look at what an RFC form might actually look like. But that's not that important because it kind of depends on your organization. But in the more mature process, which this is from the request, we actually go through. Notice that this is IT staff. The IT staff say, all right, we know what you want. We understand what you're trying to accomplish here. So let's architect this thing out. Let's design what that change might look like, document it, and that is the basis of a change proposal that then goes from here to the change manager, who then, if they determine that I'm finding this is easier than my laser, they move it into to the change process, and it goes to CAB, whatever your normal process is. And I'll just say that the typical CAB is a weekly meeting, face-to-face typically. Sometimes it's a conference call. Sometimes we're using any kind of WebEx sharing, et cetera, blah, blah. Some people do it more frequently, which has challenges. Some people have a Tuesday CAB for infrastructure and a Thursday CAB for applications. Those are all great. There's no rules about this. Do what makes sense in your organization. With the one caveat is the more frequently CAB meets, the more burdensome it is for people, and frequently that creates a, oh gee, I have to go to CAB again, I just did that yesterday kind of effect. The other part you have to balance, yes sir? CAB is? Oh, thank you. Change Advisory Board. And I'm going to answer a question that you didn't answer, which is, I thought it was the Change Approval Board. And a lot of people call it the Change Approval Board. The reason it's called the Change Advisory Board is because the role of the CAB is to review, evaluate, and deal with the details, and they provide some level of this is our analysis. We recommend that this goes forward. We recommend that you send this back for further review and whatnot. And ultimately, if you think in terms of accountability, organizational accountability, the authority goes to the change manager, who would be the one that says, yes, this change needs to go forward. Now, if you were here at the morning session, I talked about don't amass power at the top. So how does those reconcile? Well, there's two things that one can do with power. You can amass it to yourself, or you can leverage it and delegate it for the effective operation. And you can tell which I'm a fan of. So the CAB is an advisory group that looks at the changes and does certain evaluation pieces with it. So once they evaluate it, then they will recommend an action. The change manager is the one that actually approves it or rejects it. And if they reject it, then they send it back to square one, which basically means, is it a change that we really shouldn't be doing? Or is it a change that needs further clarification? Are we really missing a key point here? Is there an upcoming life cycle replacement of an application or an infrastructure component that make this, like, maybe we shouldn't be doing this if we're going to just get rid of that thing in 3 months, or maybe we have to because the business risk is so high. So that's what that loop is about. I rarely see requests rejected, because most organizations, we don't come up willy-nilly with proposals for changes. They're usually things that are kind of important. The ones that probably should be rejected are the ones that we never see, that people just do, at night or at times that we're not thinking about. Okay, so if we assume that they approve that, then that is actually an authorization point, and that very much overlaps with the SDLC or your project management office, who, you might be familiar with the SDLC, design, approve, build, et cetera, review. All of those stages, I don't normally talk about that, but they overlay just perfectly to what the service management view of what those stage gates are in the process. One of which is, once we reviewed it and determined that it's an acceptable risk level, then that authorizes the change to go into the actually creating it. And that happens down here by staff. And once it's completed, we have test results, we understand what the change is, we have reason to believe that it's going forward, it comes back to the CAB, Change Advisory Board, for a second review, which is basically, those become kind of bookends. It's like, the saying, say what you do what you say. Well, the change proposal is, this is what we're going to do. The second time when you come back to the CAB and says, we set out to do this, we've done this, here's the test results, and it can include we thought we were going to achieve these things, but we've worked with the business, and this is how it's actually working, so we're in better shape now. It's not a waterfall kind of thing, but the idea is that CAB has had an opportunity to look at it in its kind of its raw form, and then it's like, yep, you met your objective. And that, if you recall from this morning, puts the change process in a control position that they can actually say, well, you recall that you set out to do these things, and this change doesn't look like it actually is going to achieve that, or it's not going to achieve maybe 2 of the 6 points that you set out to do. So let's talk about that. Is the business in on this? Have we renegotiated those deliverables? So we become very engaged in, are we actually achieving what we set out to do? All right, so once we've got it into there, the CAB reviews it, they recommend an action, approve or reject it. If they reject it, they send it back to this process, because we don't send it all the way back to square one. We push it back one step. But if it gets approved, the last thing that the change manager does is publish a change schedule. That takes a lot of forms, anywhere from a SharePoint, an email, a bulletin board, whatever. It's whatever's relevant in the organization. Typically, it's something electronic. Often is an email of, here's the list of changes for this week or for tonight or whatever. It depends on your context. But having a published schedule lets everybody know what changes were approved and were actually going forward versus what changes were delayed or rejected or pushed back and they're still in development. So everybody's clear what the game plan is. Okay, good. Boom, 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 off we go. And then, of course, we go into that green thing there, which is the change implementer actually implements that change. And ultimately, now this is like a very 20,000-foot level thing. I've asked for customer acceptance. Every organization does that to a different degree, but the idea is it comes all the way back to the customer who said, I need something, and then at the end of the day, the customer needs to be in a position that they say, either overtly or covertly, they say, yep, that's exactly what we wanted. And what they might want is that the server works in the morning the same way it did the night before. Yep, that's exactly what we wanted. You don't necessarily have to have, call a customer at 11 o'clock at night saying, we did it, are you okay with that? So, you kind of understand that that takes different forms, but we don't want to lose track that it starts with and ends with the business need and the customer being in the driver's seat or being in the main consumer. So that's the main process. Questions on that? You've probably seen some of this. You may have seen some of this happening in your organization. You might do it slightly differently, and that's all fine. These are the basic elements, and like I said this morning, is if you have a project management office or you have a very strongly enumerated SDLC, embrace that. That's perfect. You don't need to push other things out or create a duplicate function because we're doing ITIL or some other form of service management. Is the idea of best practices, these things need to happen, not that they need to happen within the ITIL world or something like that. So just kind of keep that in mind, that this is a full court press or a full team activity that we're doing here, and there's a lot of being successful has to do with getting people engaged in the process. Service management doesn't happen in silos. Change management absolutely cannot happen in silos and should not happen in silos. It should be we're all working to achieve these results, and it's going to take people from all of the so-called silos working seamlessly together. All right, so I want to, I was going to go back. Whoops. There's a couple of practitioner notes that I left off on this morning that I was going to get back to. Yeah, so, and the practitioner's notes for those that weren't at the morning session are basically brick walls that I bounced off of personally, things that I've learned from that process, things I've learned from talking to a lot of people that have bounced off brick walls. I get emails all the time from people saying, I'm doing this and I'm doing that, and the senior vice president is an idiot and doesn't understand the value of change. I get these emails, so of course I can't share them. It's like you just said your company is struggling and it's a major healthcare provider or something like that. But I get to amass all of that into this is what's happening out there. So these practitioner notes are very relevant. And one of the things is it's really important to understand as much as you can about whatever processes that you're trying to implement or bring into your organization. But it's really, really important not to become a zealot and say, my gosh, we got to do this whole giant thing. We have to. And we're going to talk about why in a minute. But as soon as you start hearing somebody, well, why do we need to do that? And their answer is, because ITIL says, done, game over, new game. Okay, because ITIL doesn't say to do anything. ITIL says you should be managing risk. You should be effectively implementing changes that your business needs. You should be making sure that you're minimizing negative impact and achieving business outcomes. It never says how you do that. It just says these are the things that need to be done, and here's some things that a lot of people who are pretty successful at this are doing that might work for you. There's other ways to achieve that. I know it's very non-ITIL. If you go to an ITIL class, don't answer my answers. Answer the class's answers so that you can get your certification. But this is what we do in the real world. Learn from others. I can't emphasize enough that there is a global community of people who do this, people who spend an inordinate amount of time about certain features, like me, for some reason, spend a lot of time with change management. Learn from people who are doing this, and I can give you a half dozen people without taking a breath who know it way better than I do. There's a lot of people out there, and they're very willing to share their knowledge. What they can't tell you is how to do it in your organization. That's what you have to do. They can say, well, we've tried this, and we've struggled with that, and this seems to work for us. And where those things fit, absolutely, embrace them, use them, leverage them. But this is about you and your organization. Make sure that you build into your process things that might be coming on later down the line. We talked about this morning about configuration management, which everybody knows that's a mythical thing where we actually know all the pieces and all the states and all the attributes and all how they're interconnected. There's a lot of really cool tools now that go out and scan your network and tell you here's all your servers and here's how they're interconnected and all that sort of stuff. That's really cool. And that comes really close to actually having a configuration management database. But the idea of configuration management is that you're actually managing the configurations, not just aware of them and reporting on them. And I know that you can snapshot and then baseline and then who authorized this change and things like that. So there's a lot that you can do. But if your organization isn't doing that, which many organizations aren't, and change management, so one of the stages once change management has authorized a change to be moved forward is change management also authorizes the configuration process to make those changes in the configuration database. Change is the one that authorizes that. So if you don't have a configuration process, well, then you can't do mature change management. So that's just something that you got to keep in mind. But you want to, I call it stubbing out. So like in your process, just acknowledge that this would be the point at which we would send out a notification to people tracking the configuration, or have some output into a configuration system, automated or otherwise. It's just build that into your thought process so you're kind of thinking about the future, because we talked again about this morning about if our perception of what change management is based on what we're doing now, then as we mature, it just makes it that much harder. So if we understand the big picture, anticipate where we might be adding some maturity down the road, and that's where best practice frameworks can really help. They talk about things that you're going, we'll never do this, or we're certainly not doing this now. It's like, well, that's okay. You know, at least leave a little bit of a grain in there for that. Be successful with your small program and then improve. That is definitely a lesson that's been learned by many, many, many people over many, many millennium. Also, this sounds really weird coming from a kind of a process or organizational capability, but there really is, the relationships are exceedingly important in making things happen. The people that you need on board are the ones that are either going to make or break the program. The best process in the world is not going to be successful in your organization if the people don't come on board. And the people are relational. That's just the way we are. Try to get your key thought leaders on board. And if you're new to the organization, be very intentional. Who are the people that if Jane says go, everybody goes? Well, that's what we're doing. That's the people that you want to get engaged. They're usually subject matter experts or people who are, you know, senior members of staff, or, you know, the ones that if things go bad, that's the one you say, okay, let's go get Joe. Joe's going to be the one that fixes this. Well, that's the guy that you want involved in the process, and it's something that you want to be very, very intentional about.
Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
The second and the third bullets.
Yep.
Sometimes in my organization, which isn't anywhere else, like with each other, like they're expecting a certain process.
Yes.
And so to them, if you don't follow that, you're never going to get 1 or 2. So how do I reconcile that?
So that's actually a really good question. I almost feel like I don't have a good answer for you, but I'll try.
Give it a shot.
I'll give it a shot. Well, so one of the and this is going to sound like you're manipulating people, but it's really not. Is if you take as basic of a process as you can possibly get by with, and you bring that to people and get that becoming the thing. One of the keys that I've seen at the second to the last time that I've been a change manager and implementing change in an organization that really wasn't that friendly to doing change management was I brought in a very, very basic process and presented it in such a way of, hey, I think this would be good for us. I think it'll work for us. What do you think? And we started just following it. And within a few weeks, you know, the guy with all the expertise says, well, look, if you're going to do that, what you really need to do is this. And I was like, bam, I couldn't have said it better myself. In fact, I wish I would have said that 2 weeks ago, because then I would be the smart guy. But as it is, you're now the smart guy, and now you're bought into this. And so if you set the bar low enough that we get people to buy in, then they can help bring us forward. Because the thing that you really want to avoid in implementing standardized or best practices frameworks or processes, and some of you heard me talk about this morning, is if you come in with all the smarts in the world and, you know, I'm the ITIL certified blah, 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 and I did this for a Fortune 10 company and I'm really, really smart, then you get that instant pushback of you know, you're telling me that we're doing everything wrong, you're invalidating what I've been doing for 20 years, and you have no idea the blood, sweat, and tears that I've put into this organization to overcome bad management decisions and underfunding and all of this sort of stuff, and now you're telling me I'm doing it wrong, I'm out, I'm done. And that just pushes them away. So it's better to give them the opportunity to come in and join the effort, because it's, well, we're going to fast forward in a minute, but it's really hard to disagree with some of the fundamentals of change management. Is, don't you think we should impact our customers less? Yes, I do. Don't you think that we should have more uptime and availability? Yeah. And to do that, we should probably better manage risk, better plan things out. Those are kind of concepts that, you know, like motherhood and apple pie, they're really hard to argue with. But if you say, well, I think we should do this process, or at my last company we did this process, those are really easy to argue with. And so rather than creating an argument, let's create an agreement about, yes, I agree we could do a better job. Well, then how would we do that? Here's some ideas, and here's some ideas. So hopefully that gets close to where you're going. People are interesting, and IT people, I mean, and I've been one all of my professional life, are interesting people because we become expert by knowing stuff and knowing it well and being very, very good at it. And we are very good at dealing with complex systems. What we're not so good is dealing with people and and how they work. You know, because yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, change management is one of those. For a lot of people, it's the first time that we're kind of prying open the tin can that is, you know, the Unix administrator that can literally work miracles, and we don't know why or how. We know why. I mean, we don't know how it is that that person is able to do that. And when we start looking in, it's like, hey, we need to evaluate changes. Let's make sure we're not, you know, not causing problems elsewhere. You know, because you go back 20 years in the IT organization, it's like we could get away with being in silos. You make your changes, make sure you're doing well, and it doesn't impact anybody else. But we got systems that are so complex now. I mean, very high-end corporations make changes where, you know, a server that isn't being used by anyone brings down a major payment processing system. It happens. And it's like, how is that even possible? It doesn't have anything to do with that, and yet it does. And so we need a full court press. We need everybody engaged. So your system that you own, and I love that you own it. I love that night and day you're thinking about how can you manage and run and maintain and make this system fly perfectly. We need that. That's way more than what we're paying you for. However, if we allow you to do that in a vacuum and not kind of expose that to the broader, you know, so this becomes really kind of touchy. It's like almost like a group therapy where it's like, you know, John, let's talk about how you feel. And it's like, yeah.
And it's like, yeah,
Yeah,
we're not really
we don't do that. We don't do that very well.
This is you mentioned this morning that you can have a tendency to create a bureaucracy.
Yes.
Level, and you said try to avoid that.
Yes.
However, I know this friend of mine who has this school district, it's not free, by the way, has 3 departments, instructional, customer services, and
Yes.
infrastructure. And sometimes the infrastructure guys are doing things that impact some of the people, and this change management
Yes.
in place that is acting in there, but we never know that these things are happening.
Yes.
Why is this happening? Or how come I'm approaching it? Have you told me that this was happening? I probably would have started over there, not over here. So, is a change management, does it have to include that many people in a team, like, for example, part of these 3 teams together, or will the team managers of those departments, will that be enough?
Again, it's,
To approve and say, we
Yeah.
are proposing this, it will impact these 2 other departments, please sign off on here, put your initials, and we are.
yeah. So the easy and the archaic answer is, oh, absolutely. They all have to go to the same cab, and so the change manager answers off on everything, and we know that everybody's on board. But that's not practical. It isn't, and I wouldn't recommend that. What I would recommend is so essentially what you have is a delegated approval authority, that infrastructure has been delegated authority to manage infrastructure changes. And the same with the other, you know, the other 2 areas. What we don't have is that coordination between them. And so typically when you set up a delegated authority structure, you would actually define, you've been delegated authority to manage infrastructure changes so long as it's limited to one site or one domain. When it crosses certain boundaries, it needs to come up to the next level, at least for that coordination piece. Yeah. Well, hopefully shortly there'll be a publication that actually has this in it that I'm not allowed to talk about, so says the publisher, but it's so we were talking, remember I told you about the killing cab. There's 3 main things that I believe. Some people try to make your cab very, very powerful and effective. I try to make it very, very powerful but almost hidden, to the point where nothing comes to cab because cab is doing such an effective job. So the 3 main ways to do that is standard changes, which we talked about. And most of you are doing standard changes whether you're doing it formally or not. And the case in point is, look, adding a user to a server is a change and it could potentially impact things. It could. I had somebody fat finger a group policy that brought down 6,000 computers 2 weeks ago. And his answer was, well, I was in class, I came out to implement it, didn't think it, I mean, the change itself that he was proposing was really benign, should have been done after hours, but he just wanted to bang it out and get it done. This is an actual case from 2 weeks ago. Brought down 6,000 computers, individual client computers. And so the littlest of things that really, really shouldn't be a problem can cause problems in other domains. And so there's a risk associated with that. And so that's where when you structure your delegated domains, I'm sorry, let me go back to this, finish the thought on standard changes. So when you have things that are considered generally low risk, and you have a documented process, like user adds or minor changes or adding capacity to an array or those kind of things, those things that you do in your daily operation, document the process, vet out the process, and say this is effective and it should not have problems. We've demonstrated it, quite frankly, is what we've done for the last 2 years. So let's do that forward. Make that a standard change, and then don't even discuss those kind of changes. Push them down to the people that are implementing it. That's going to take maybe, depending on your organization, maybe a third of changes and push them down to where CAB doesn't even look at them. The other is delegated change authority. So you say, look, so I was my first network management gig was I was responsible for one site that had 10,000 employees of this corporation, and any network changes for that site I was able to approve. It was my domain. And for the most part, it was pretty simple. We had the redundant border routers but everything here below. Now, anything that touched those border routers and on out, that had to go to the next higher level, because that absolutely, positively could have impacted other people, especially the network fabric. Also, if there was distributed systems where there was a reliance not only on my site, but maybe a hot spare site or redundancy off-site, making those kind of changes here could actually break that link, and those I had to take up higher also. But replacing a switch or a business partner, a firewall rule for a local business partner network, what we call them, DMZ now, would have only impact on us. And so I was given that authority. So that's the second way. And the third way to kill CAB or to reduce the amount of things that are coming to CAB are change models, where these are things that we don't necessarily do every day, but this is how we do them. It's kind of a prototype of, I'll give you an example. An organization I was with 4 or 5 years ago, we had the hardest time with server decommissions. It's like, oh yeah, total dead, it's been sitting dead for months, we're just going to decommission it. I'm the change manager and this is what I'm hearing. And it was like, next day, whoa, so we had to bring it back online. And it was like, and after this happened 3 or 4 times, it's like, I feel like from Princess Bride, it's like, I don't think it means what you think it means. It's like, if it's not in use, it can't impact anything. So what they did was they came up with I worked with them, we created a model that said, look, this is what we're going to do, is we're going to analyze logs for a certain period of time, and when that gets down to a certain point, then we're going to make the network card go dark, and then we're going to let that cook for a little bit, and then we're going to actually pull the server off. And so we had this kind of this stair-stepping out kind of process. And then once because change management got real concerned about that, it's like, you could literally be bringing down our payment processing. We don't know what the impact is because you apparently don't know what your servers are doing. And so we got it to this point where it's like, as long as you're following that standard backout process, then it's literally a few moments to pull it back to the previous state. And so it comes on. The first one that we did was a full recovery, full restoration, 4 hours to bring it back from the latest snap. It was painful. So those are 3 things you can do to get a lot of stuff out of CAB, and so you get CAB more focused on these big things that really are multi-site. And I think I owe you a little bit more on the delegated authority, and we can talk about that. This is one of the, if I get quoted a lot, I usually get quoted on outcomes over process, because it's so the problem that ITIL people and service management people talk about. We talk about process. As you go grab one of the ITIL books, and here's the process for this, and here's the process for that. It's no wonder then that we go back to our jobs and say, I'm going to implement whatever process. And we need processes. Processes are important, but it's the outcomes that they actually produce that are what's really important. You know, there's more than one way to, I've never skinned a cat, so I don't know why people say that, but I mean, there's more than one way to get a job done, and if you become very, very an ITIL zealot or a service management zealot of no, you have to do it like this, and if you find yourself saying, because I worked for a company that was very successful, wrong answer. My last change management gig was, we did it like this, wrong answer. Because ITIL said, wrong answer. Because my buddy that worked for a big corporation did it, wrong answer. There's a lot of wrong answers about why you should have a process. But there's only one right answer about business outcomes, and that's because that's what our business is paying us to do. They're expecting us to produce results. And I talk a lot about that, which, you know, kind of puts me at odds with my ITIL buddies, because, look, value from a process or from the things that we do should actually be measurable in dollars and cents. Because if you're sitting on a board of directors, I realize we're public sector here, but if you're sitting on board of directors, you're fiscally accountable for the investment that your organization makes. So if you go buy a dump truck and you don't need a dump truck, that's being fiscally irresponsible. Why did you do that? Well, I don't know, because I was moving bark dust on the weekends. I thought it was a great way for me to have access to a dump truck. In the same way, if you invest money in building processes that don't actually elevate your organization's ability to achieve some outcome, you know, if it's just an activity that you did and it's like, I don't know, I guess it's better. If it doesn't actually have measurable value, then your boards of directors or your senior management might have made an investment that actually isn't paying off, and they should be held accountable for that. That's weird talk for people that are used to hearing about this is change management and this is why you do it. All I'm saying is stay focused on why it is that we're here in the first place. All right, so here's what I want to do. I would like to, and let's see if I can, your first homework assignment. Did that come up? Yes. Except this is, you know what, I'm going to, this might be easier if I'm able to actually see what I'm doing. Yep, okay, so you go away. So I want you guys, if you can, are you okay with forming groups and working in groups? Anybody really, really uncomfortable with that? Yeah, I know. Yeah. Okay, let's do this. You form whatever groups you want, but please have at least 4. And what I want you to do is come up with a list of challenges that you've seen or that you can conceive of that have to do with implementing a change management process, implementing, maturing, or interacting with change management. So I'll like to scribe. I'll give you, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes, maybe less, I don't know. Just list out those things that you've seen that you either are personally struggling with or things that you think are a problem within change management. Go. I'm going to listen in.
The process for everything. So for example, we tried it, just our technology department. And it works well, but we tried to involve people outside of our department that we think might be good for these. Like, we're trying to get the director of student learning to sit in on some of the change boards. We're trying to get the director of education. So just getting the right people in the room, I think sometimes is a challenge.
You know, I coming in the first time,
And getting on their schedule.
But you could have, I could think of my director of teaching and learning.
basically said,
to get involved in some parts of the stuff. It doesn't need to be in there for the hour-long discussion of the technical, is that
And probably a tremendous waste of his time.
yeah, they'll perceive.
Quite frankly, yeah.
Yeah, maybe it would be good for him to hear, whoa, I didn't realize this was, let's do it, it's a big deal.
Everything was all down.
I think, I need to adjust my expectations, but to get that,
Just making that one change
For the right subset, it's
kind of forced the guys because they're like, oh, I have to wait. And they were all
so it goes deeper. That was just to get the conversation going, because then you have to carve it down a little bit. What do you need this up for? No, we don't need it.
and it gave them
Understanding of expectation.
How many times can you say, we're partnering in this, and if there's gonna be bugs, and we're gonna work them out together, and then they're still mad when it doesn't work properly.
I guess I feel like that's where the communication process has to come in, and the clarification of the steps and expectations of where we're going and what's gonna happen. So it's that, I mean, I'm almost picturing it like a drawing. Francisco and I have worked together before seasons, but I picture it like a drawing. Here's the end game, this is where it's gonna work, this is what we're gonna say we're done. We're still over here. Remember, this is where we're testing. Bugs will
Yeah, and
happen.
that does help. That does help. But I think your problem is kind of interesting about trying to simplify it. Your folks feel like they have to go through every little
Really,
detail.
it feels, it's a perception thing. I'm not saying it is. It feels bloated, and what happens is people see a flow chart or a step process or something, and they go, oh my God, all I want to do is buy this piece of software and put it in. Seriously, I was at Walmart, here's the CD, can I just put it on the machine? And we go, no, we got to go through this whole process. That's kind of a
So one that
example, but
we're dealing with right now too is just identifying the unforeseens.
yes.
Because and this is something actually my boss that I directly answer to, and I discuss.
I'm just messing.
I get to live in the world of two bosses.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome.
The one I work for and the one that supervises me. But in the magnitude of what we do, and I think sometimes I get a look from my boss like, well, that's just a load of horse crap. But in the magnitude of what we do, you sit here and you work through every process, start to finish, from planning to implementation to communication to rollout to, and you've got your back up plan, how we fall back, and then, and every cog seems in place. Every gear is greased, and then you flip that switch and cogs blow everywhere.
Bam.
Your
Yeah.
patience is gone.
And then it's just like,
It's as if you hadn't done any planning. It's
Right.
like total fail.
right.
Yeah.
So, what's a better process for identifying those unforeseens? Are we doing it wrong? Because honestly, in the last 6 months, I've had not at the mission critical stage, but just things that should be small that just did not go well.
Yeah.
And then I've got a staff of 7 people I'm sitting down and having a post-analysis meeting with. Okay, how do we keep this from happening again? And then something else comes up, something goes wrong, and then it's the
I
same
kind of like
thing.
what he said and you said about getting, like, we have business information systems and network, and getting all three on the cab. Because right now we have a very well-functioning change management in our information systems.
Right.
When I came on board, they already had a great plan in place, but we don't communicate that to the other two entities. I think if we could get members.
We don't always do things in concert, right?
Right.
And that creates conflict and tension
Yeah.
as well.
So if we have other people's lens on it, are they going to catch some of those unforeseens? Is there anybody else you could add to that cab that might be a valuable?
Well, and so part of that, when Nick brought this up, is maybe sometimes it's just as important to have some of those key stakeholders in there. So like if you're getting the pressure from above because they think that you're not doing everything you possibly can to make sure that that's planning, including them in some of that process,
Yeah.
then they can see, well, they can always front for you to say, listen, that's just the way it works sometimes. And I know for the fact they're working a process that 9 times out of 10 actually does work.
Yeah.
So and I hadn't thought about it before.
And that's another piece of tracking all changes can be really, really valuable, because you can actually don't hide behind them, but produce metrics that, like, just so you know, 90.
You're asking the question, basically, CJ technology preventing you from doing this. And I wanted to do that. And because of this process.
Being transparent about all this stuff. They're gonna we should really see that. So it's documented, you're going along, I don't mean to overload the documentation process, but you're documenting it. Here's I'm implementing this project. Here's all the things we've thought of.
Well, each monthly meetings, I send out a detailed list of what we're doing. Like 90% of this stuff, people don't care. I'm upgrading the array, blah, blah, blah. But I've found that when there's a problem, I say, oh, I had a problem upgrading the array. They're like, oh, you told me about that. Oh, I get that. And it's actually helped a few times when I've had problems. So because you're like, oh yeah, she said that. So it's something I've heard of before. So.
Well, normally it's like there's also this quick Monday meeting that happens on that Thursday. We have this point to what you guys do. Even if you get done anyway. You get done. Nothing to do with the work we did. It's somebody
But see, they still come back to you and complain to you because they think you broke something instead of just saying, oh, it doesn't work and moving on. So it's kind of a mixed blessing. You get that. They are communicating.
That's not the way to make sure that
We want to use those terms. I see it as, I realize that Martha's not at the table, and I think she has a stake in that. Which is gonna make your, you know, your economy, whatever it is,
Yeah.
We get together and we talk about what we're ready to launch.
So what's the original question again? Challenges?
One of the things I had thought about was that great is if you make more B for my understanding, easy form of, I think that's a big thing.
Easy form of, zero up is 4, send
Everything has to be right. So it's all
I don't have time for that. I can write it,
right.
put it out. Help desk taking hours of their time.
One giant.
Every desktop is big. Anything.
No, we have an infinite, you already have it. I need another step to do already is notice that they think it's like the employees. Yeah, sometimes I have to say, you guys will do this, apparently, but, I mean, yeah, every time, I try, I really, because I'm not that good at following processes, that's something I have. My hot day, oh, this person's having problems, oh yeah, we're supposed to make a ticket, we're gonna do that. That's a really important one. I try and
I've seen where standard changes in delegated
the best thing in the world
is
we got
so we're seeing get a lot of problems out of the standard changes. So until we get this figured out, let's bring them in here, let's take a look at it. Maybe not all the way to big, at least adding enough so geographically authority goes away.
Well, and a couple times I had to back off because they're like, well, how does this add value? If I can't answer that, then
I'm taking that anybody else sees.
but like to find out how to do now,
I don't want to.
we're a really small shop. We only have 4 text, 5 counters, and 7 sites. We're pretty small. But we're starting to get to put in help desk so we can track time. And I'm telling them, okay, we're having this major.
Right, how are we doing?
Management change. If they come to me about me, then what are you guys doing?
Come up with a big list.
Yeah. And I'm trying to get them to, they're still not doing it. They don't want to do that. We might come up at every week, okay, we only ever did 4 hours all last week between the 4 of you. So Exactly. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That we really, we sat there, we had about, we talked about we're like, I do getting into things, but they have one open ticket, and then we have another site that's like, oh, well, I can't well, the sex we did that, I'm like, but I think it was so easy to do that. Make sure
Wait a second.
Next month, it would be they could probably go.
But the problem with that is that it's not in their school. I mean, it's
They want to keep their job. And
it's in the district as a whole, but that's not, doesn't
it's better for the system, but not for the
yeah. And I need
That's all below.
yeah.
I run the outside.
Because I think people are talking like,
Of course, it's not.
which is always a problem, so we can have goals. So what do you have going?
That's another reason why I'm in trouble.
And that could have just been necessary by HR if they send it to the state. Here is your interview. So that you're and that's what
Well, that's good.
All the districts around us say the same thing about this. See, we're at 365. In the voice center. We've all been there. Different names, different classes.
Oh, that's a good idea.
What's that? So here's the thing. That's also the technicality, like you said. I mean, it's just like we've been going through and across the home lanes.
And that's probably because they're not trained. They are walking down the hall or calling on the phone. Right. Yeah,
This is going to be important. It's an easy
coordinate with my staff.
Just keep telling me.
I think it all the time. Earlier this weekend,
What's the best way to get rid of and share it as only people who have to review it, right? Because he wanted it time and sensitive, and nobody can find it until he wanted to. So send the link, email, and they click the link. It opens up. Well, I guess it says documents that are shared with outside this domain. You can't review it unless they look at
I don't tell them, I'm offering something else. And I don't want to see you forever. But I will remember when I get back to my desk.
yes, I say that. Yeah.
I want to help you.
What mitigating risk would impact the customer? I want my team to be empowered to so when we have to talk to I figured you had always thought about
Follow the process.
all right. I don't know how we're doing for time. So let's talk about some of the challenges that you've seen. So I really don't know where I'm going. Okay.
Over here, what'd you come up with? Give me a challenge. I should make somebody type for me because I'm not really good at that. But
Identifying the unforeseens.
if we all knew what we
Don't know what you don't know.
okay. I don't know if that's the way to spell it. It's not.
Close enough.
What else you got? Next group. Who was taking notes back here?
Cumbersome process, one more thing we have to do. Any addition?
That's not what he wants to hear.
One additional thing we have to do.
Increase workload.
Right.
Thank you.
Translation.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, those are all kind of the same thought. Yeah. Yeah.
We get paid overtime, so it's okay.
Yeah, I get paid by the words. Was there another group, or were you guys all together?
Another one back here.
So we talked about creating software installation request forms,
Okay.
an approval process.
Simplification of the process. That's a challenge.
Communication.
Communication.
That's always important.
Even when you do it right, you do it wrong.
Stakeholders don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Oh,
What does my wife say?
Oh, yeah. And they're the decision makers.
Getting the right people, in the right time, on the right subject together.
Yeah.
What else did you come up with?
Resistance to change.
Oh, somebody had to say that.
Somewhere.
We are the board.
Slash.
That would be like slash, I like the way I do it now.
But they want to be involved. Those all
I know,
nice.
I know.
Yeah. But just like feel the.
Okay.
Or something like that.
What else is on the table? I think you guys had one more. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Just how does it add value?
I love that question. No, I mean, I literally do, because that is the right question. As a practitioner consultant, that I don't necessarily have the right answer. Maybe for your organization it doesn't. Maybe we shouldn't do anything. And then the person that hires you go, wait a second, I thought you were a change management guy. Yeah, I am. And if it's not producing business value for you, maybe we shouldn't be doing it.
Well,
Yes.
it also, drive up costs.
Yeah.
We've actually seen, change process cost us more money.
I'm gonna say cost optimization, because so I was really freaked out when my corporation was doing, I can't name the name, but we were doing some work for desktop configuration of a aeronautics organization that did both civilian and military. And their desktops were lock solid. There was 0 changes allowed. And I just laughed. It's like, seriously? It's like you couldn't replace a mouse, you couldn't install a print driver, you couldn't do anything without change approval. I thought that is just so incredibly bureaucratic. However, and some of us talked about bits of it this morning, is every one of those is considered a risk point that could put your defense contracts at risk if you're not effectively managing. How do you know that driver isn't bug ridden? How do you know? How have you vetted out? And this gets into some really weird stuff that most of us don't have to deal with. But when you're dealing with military, DoD, and things like that. So the answer really was for the average, dentist office, do we lock down the computer to the point where you can't do anything? Probably not, because there's a cost-risk, cost-benefit analysis that needs to be done. But in the military, where you could lose literally billion-dollar contracts, military defense contracting, it's, what's that? Or people get killed. Yeah.
Planes crash.
Yeah.
They consider that value added.
Yeah.
Yeah. On one side.
We're going to spin sideways politically. A friend of mine who was a Navy, Army Ranger, he said, look, most of you civilians don't really get it. I'm paid to kill people and blow stuff up. And I thought, that's awful. And I thought, no, you know what business you're in. That's what your job is. And if you did anything other than that, I would say maybe you're not doing your job. Now, I like it when you go build bridges and feed, starving children in third world countries. I think that's a really cool thing. But you got to know what business you're in. So that's a really great question. What else do we have? Anything else on the table?
Identifying and quantifying different types of change, if it's a standard change.
Yep.
Yeah, just define change. And what's the definition of a change?
You'd have to have a meeting first.
Yeah, committee.
Nobody's said emergency changes yet. That one comes up a lot.
That's break fix, that's completely different.
Yeah.
That's not change.
Completely different. When is it gonna be up? When we're done?
Isn't everything an emergency?
I have seen organizations where emergency changes or a major incident is actually a license to do anything.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, we have a major incident. Boom, boom, boom. Do all these things over here that we've been wanting to do because we totally bypass everything.
Well,
Hit the red button. Hit the red
that
button.
can really compound your problem.
It can absolutely. Yeah, so you've probably done Kepner Trago, you want to isolate, make one change, there's a whole process. You guys know this.
Yeah.
This is your world.
Real quick, a few weeks ago, we had an issue. Middle of the night, acting director, domain controller, for whatever reason, didn't get any NTP responses back from our NTP core. At the same time, it pushed an update, once it said we're not going to accept any more packets from NTP as authoritative, it pushed a zone file update to our primary DNS server, which means nothing else can talk to that.
Anything, yep.
Probably 4 o'clock in the morning that happened.
Yeah. I had talked to a vice president once who wanted me to change the way DNS works because
That conversation too.
yeah. And I it's like, okay, if you're gonna fire me, but here's the deal. The time to live is set for this, and I cannot change that. I cannot change that. That's just the way it is. So once that trigger's been pulled, we're done.
I worked somewhere that told me to turn off active directory integrated DNS.
Yeah. Ooh.
I said I'm not doing that.
I'm not going to do that. So there's two areas that we really need to focus in on, and that is focusing in on those kinds of challenges that we have the ability to control. Have you seen the circles of influence, circle of control? And I'm not going to go into it. One of the exercises that we could do if you gave me another hour would be to actually map those out, because right in the bullseye is things that you have direct control over. And some things are things that you have direct control over. And some things you can influence. And then this outside ring, we call it gravity, which is you can shake your fist at it, you can say whatever you want, you can get mad, but gravity is gravity and you can't change it. And some of the challenges that are on the table are things that you can directly control, some things you can influence, and some of them are gravity issues. Their organization, their politics, their people, their things like that. And so when you start running down your challenges list, is try to focus in on those things that you actually have. Probably the best use of your time would be on those things that you have direct control over. Things that your actions can significantly improve, or if you get several people together working on this, you can improve that. So that's number one. The other thing is recognizing what kind of a challenge that really is. I actually had multiple columns because I was going to get to that, but we kind of got sidetracked on some other things, which is good. But there's a psychological concept that I find very applicable, and which is that a lot of our human behavior comes down to attitudes, behaviors, and cultures. And the quick analysis is this: attitudes are what we think. That's who we are, how we work, our predispositions, our thought processes, and all that. And our behaviors are and you can't tell what somebody's attitude is. You can't understand what's going on in side of somebody's head, and sometimes even they don't know. Now, I'm not a psychologist. Talk to Amy McLaughlin if you want to talk psychology. But how you think, those thought processes that are in your head affect your behaviors, what your actions do. And so attitudes drive behaviors, and a culture is made by those behaviors that are commonly accepted within some form of a group. These things are acceptable, these things aren't acceptable, and that produces the culture. And the reason I bring this up isn't because I want to teach about something I don't know that much about, is because most of the issues that are on your lists probably are associated with attitudes or behaviors or the culture in which you're operating. And so if you're trying to change the culture or trying to change some process within the culture, you come face to face with people's attitudes and their behaviors. And let me give you a couple of examples. Is we are Maslowian in nature. In other words, I think that's the right, not Pavlov, but Maslow's, the hierarchy of needs is like, breathing and basic needs. And as we get threatened on these core levels, we start responding in ways. And so when you start changing, Brian and I were talking about this, I'd love to talk to you more about this, but we were talking about when, you have a technical expert who is banging it out night and day trying to manage their environment. And then Mr. Change Management comes along and says, you need change management because you're not effectively managing your changes. And I'm being me, not anybody else. Brian knows that he is really doing what he can. I'm just not just saying this because I like him, but he's got that right energy about it. It's like, this is customer service. This is important. What I do is important, and I know that that's important. So when Mr. Change Manager comes by and says you're doing everything all wrong, that triggers some deeper level things of, look, I'm doing things that I think are fundamentally valuable, and when I leave work, I feel like I've done a good job. And I'm not putting words in his mouth. This is human nature. And so when we start depriving people of saying, hey, what you've been doing isn't worth anything, or you've been doing it wrong, all your expertise, all your training and background is all wrong, we start triggering some of these ugly kind of protectionism things. And those really make it hard to implement any kind of change or process because people are fighting against things that aren't about great processes or producing great outcomes. They're fighting against, you don't think I'm smart. You don't think I've been doing a good job. You might even think that I'm incompetent and might fire me. And there's a lot of weird things that happen inside people's heads when you start threatening those things. And so when we talked about getting your subject matter expert on board and getting them engaged, there's a lot of positive energy that comes out of saying, hey, what you're doing is good. And what we need to do is connect it to the broader process. And so I think I'm awfully close to my 2 o'clock. So let me kind of summarize by saying this. I'm not sure of all the message that you're picking up from what I'm saying is, but there's nothing wrong with ITIL and service management. There's absolutely nothing wrong. What there is something wrong with is how it's often used, or it's how it's been used for many, many years. And it's given us all a very, very bad taste. There is a time coming for all of us that are going to be in this industry for more than 10 years where the amount of automation and the amount of technology that are doing the kind of stuff that we do manually or as part of our job nowadays is going to make it virtually impossible for a traditional CAB-based authoritarian command and control change management to produce any value whatsoever. And so if change management doesn't move upstream and get engaged with the overall end-to-end process, which was what the designers always intended it to be, it will be irrelevant. And so if you're just getting started with formalizing your change management, I encourage you to stay at that stage 1 where you're actually, where CAB is like digging in and holding on. Stay there as short a period as you possibly can, before you start creating standard changes and delegated authority and standard change models and empowering people to do that while you're watching those changes. Like, hey, if the quality of the standard changes are high enough, don't give them another thought, just let them rip on through. If you're doing, application development and you're using DevOps where you're firing stuff into production and it's producing high quality results, you don't need to do anything more than that. Just measure it, monitor it, and make sure it's continuing to do that. And if problems come up, then look how can we improve the process. So my focus is, as change management matures, it's releasing its grip on individual requests for changes and focusing more and more on, are we doing what the business needs? Are we as an organization doing what the business needs? And are we engineering the quality into the process to make sure it happens as is? And no matter where you're at on that spectrum, that's what your maturity looks like. If you don't even have a cab and you've never heard of a request for change, start there, but make sure that you're looking at, we want to build an engineer a process that produces high quality results. I do have business cards. I am happy to answer emails. I love this stuff, as you might have noticed. And if there's any way that I can ever help you in what you're trying to do regarding change management or service management, I would love to talk to you.
Why are you looking at tickets? Hey, I'll see you after next session. I got a quick one. Exactly. I'm doing the
Standing around.
I know, right?
Hey now, I was not the one to play pool.
She probably was much more effective playing pool than you were playing.
I was going upstairs for the data mining and assessment data.
Where are you guys going next? When's the next one start? 2:15?
Right here.
Is it right here in this
Third
room?
I think I'm upstairs in Huckleberry.
The slide deck will run itself, really? And I need to adjust that. So I'm up in Jeremy's right now. But we,
I would just assume that actually went to where, what time it was.
Sort of like our articles,
Dresden.
yeah, that's sort of what
So, you may have already signed up, but one resource that I found is we use what's called a swivel. There's a full foundation version of that. I choose this one. What's good is the funnels give you listen to so that you collaborators. Oh, sorry. I just want to grab that before you walk away. So that's sometimes I like to see